What's up, Taylor Lee for Congress? This is YouTube here, and today I've got another defense news update for you. It's your weekly videos. And the first story today is what's it called? Oh, geez, we're off to a great start here. The new U.S. carrier Gerald R. Ford has finally finished its three-part explosive shock trials. And this is something a lot of people don't think about. I didn't even realize it was a thing, but it's one of those things that makes perfect sense when you learn about it. These blasts are meant to simulate combat environment, so you're basically shock-proofing your ship and making sure that it's not going to sink or what kind of damage it will sustain. That way you know what to anticipate. The final shock test involved a 40,000-pound charge. That's pretty big. For those of you who are familiar with the United States Marine Corps' standard issue grenades, that's 4 ounces of composition B. I'm not entirely sure what the explosive charge compound is for these, but that's several orders of magnitude larger than that grenade. So if that gives you a context for the overall mass, and you can see how big these explosions are compared to the ship here. And the explosion registered as a 3.9 magnitude earthquake on the ship, and that's pretty substantial. It's definitely something you'll feel. We actually had a pretty big earthquake here in Utah last year. If any of you remember that, but it was destroying buildings and busting pipelines, but I think it was probably a little bit larger magnitude than this. And the carrier took less damage than expected, and that's really good news in the context of knowing that other major powers in the world are developing anti-ship missiles. Though usually those are going to be direct hits, these explosions were not direct hits. This article here says that it was right off the bow, but it really wasn't like super close. You can see that here. But yeah, overall, good progress on the new U.S. carrier. And next up, we have some news from the White House. The Biden administration is approving a bipartisan deal that's totaling approximately $1.2 trillion for infrastructure upgrades. So just a brief overview. The bipartisan plan is going to improve healthy and sustainable transportation options for millions of Americans. And this is going to be by modernizing and expanding transit and rail networks across the country. I'm a really big fan of this, especially for public transit. Though I'm a big fan of high-speed rail, and that's something the U.S. is abysmal at. We're going to be repairing and rebuilding a lot of roads and bridges with a focus on climate change mitigation, which kind of makes sense, especially from a defense standpoint. Resilience also. If you're one of those people that thinks taxation is theft, this is going to help prevent you getting your hard-earned dollars stolen in the future. And here's something that I had to think was hilarious. Equity. Why is there an emphasis on equity? I don't really understand the importance of that for infrastructure. Everybody can use a road. Anybody can get on the road. I really don't understand why that's pointed out here. Then this is something also that I find fascinating. I think it's a good thing, and especially considering that the U.S. military is making a big push towards using renewables and being not fossil fuel dependent. We're going to have a lot more electric vehicles in the U.S. Armed Forces. So the Biden administration is pushing to install over 500,000 electric vehicle chargers across the nation. And if you remember, the Interstate Project was created as a means of rapid redeployment of U.S. troops for defense purposes. Today we make really good use of it for commerce, but we're easy to forget that that's there for redeployment of troops. So having electric chargers along the way is really good for defense. Electrify thousands of schools and transit buses. Just kidding. The sentence continues. I just thought that was funny. Across the country to reduce harmful emissions and drive domestic manufacturing of zero-emission vehicles and components. This is really good for U.S. manufacturing because if we have to retool our factories for a defensive posture, similar to what we did in World War II, this is going to help our manufacturers be prepared to help with U.S. vehicles. Right now, a lot of our vehicles are made by foreign entities, some domestic. But the big one that comes to mind is Oshkosh. It's a Canadian company. That's where the MTVR comes from in the Marine Corps. It's actually an excellent vehicle. I love it. Recommend it. But yeah, having that. And then also, you never know what kind of vehicles you're going to need to use. So in a defensive situation, if you have to evacuate, having a reliable electricity grid for school buses and electric school buses for evacuations, it's good news overall, in my opinion. Eliminate the nation's service lead lines and pipes. That's good because lead is a really soft metal, creates poisonous water if you're drinking from it, but also the pipes are prone to erosion because lead is so soft. So having a robust, long-lasting infrastructure relies on materials that don't erode. So that's going to mean more brass and PVC pipes and a lot less lead. Connect every American to high-speed internet. This, I think, is more of a social issue, but when it comes to defense, everybody having news so the nation can coordinate on roughly the same page is extremely important, in my opinion. Upgrade our power infrastructure, including by building thousands of miles of new resilient transmission lines. That's it's more good news because when there's natural disasters, earthquakes, stuff like that, bombing runs, in a defensive situation, having resilient infrastructure, I keep saying this, is really important. I'm not going to harp on that too much more because it's super annoying. This is a really big one, perhaps the most important for the context of my videos, is prepare more of our infrastructure for the impacts of climate change, cyber attacks, and extreme weather events. Climate change is, I think it's a slower thing than most people think of, but it is a relevant defensive consideration, considering that a lot of battles have been determined by weather. But cyber attacks, that's one that we've been talking about quite a bit, especially with certain foreign entities like Russia and China. China's a bigger one, but Russia's not above some good hacking. A lot of our secrets have been stolen by other powers because we have not had the proper cyber infrastructure implemented. And then here we just have a small breakdown in billions of dollars that the White House is putting out, so you can see kind of where the funds are going in a snippet. So I'm going to go over a little bit of this. For roads, bridges, and other major projects, we've got $109 billion. Public transit, $49 billion. Airports, $25 billion. That's really good. Ports and waterways, $16 billion. That's another really important one. Water infrastructure, especially in the West where we're prone to droughts, $55 billion. And keep in mind, most of this is not for a defensive position. This is more of a social issue, but it has a lot of overlap with the defense sector. $65 billion for broadband infrastructure. That's what we're talking about earlier with people being able to communicate, but also with cybersecurity. Western water storage, $5 billion. That's something that's probably not going to get talked about a lot, but my Utah voters, I support that. We need our water. I reckon this is probably, speaking of defense, we've got the jets flying over. Hang on. Okay. I reckon this is probably more water reservoirs like Pineview than it is like underground tanks, but yeah. So that's it for this week. Tune in next week. We might have some super interesting stories for you. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to dislike and unsubscribe and leave a hateful comment.